Is the fight going to be between, and there's two parts to this. One is right now we've got all these different models. They're all being trained. They're all operating. They all use energy. So there's a competition amongst these new AI nation states that are rising. Okay, fine. But at some point, all of these models are cross-polluting themselves via the internet, which I can see happening. So they all become a supercluster of these things. Is there going to be a conflict between the AIs?
Hey guys, welcome to Everyday Finance. Raoul Pal explores whether certain leading Bitcoin ETFs are spearheading a new wave of adoption, tying this surge to the broader macroeconomic backdrop, especially the possibility that real interest rates may soon decline. This potential drop in rates would make risk assets like Bitcoin more attractive. Meanwhile, the crypto market is experiencing a liquidity boom, particularly through stablecoins. With over $236.6 billion in stablecoins now in circulation, a $2 billion increase just in the last week, there's a massive pool of capital on standby, ready to enter the market. Historically, such rapid expansions in stablecoin supply have preceded significant market rallies, often acting as dry powder that fuels upward momentum. Bitcoin's recent 10% rally to $93,000 seems to reflect more than just technical setups. It suggests that fresh capital is genuinely flowing in. As exchange reserves shrink and buying pressure grows, the $100,000 target looks increasingly within reach, especially if this wave of liquidity hits the market in full force.
But I think of it as if most exponentials are Metcalfe's law, is how you look at them. This is Reed's law, which is Metcalfe's law.
Yeah, well, but this is way beyond the Metcalfe's law.
Because because Reed's law is Metcalfe's law squared.
Yeah, but it's not squared. What I'm trying to say, it's a completely different thing. Because what happens next is the amount of time it has to take children declines proportionally to the amount of people in the world. And that's true too, because each new generation of computation takes less time because it becomes. And then, so what happens is first you iterate multiplication to create exponentiation. Then you iterate exponentiation to create what the process called tetration, the powers of exponents. Then you iterated this to create pentation, hexation. And then you have but then what happens next? This is what people are missing. Then we move to a completely different paradigm, the paradigm which we cannot even conceive right now. What all of this that I described to you is still within a paradigm that we can conceive right now. But what happens in actual math, when you start doing this process, which is called fast-growing hierarchies, eventually they move to completely different, totally wild paradigms, which are just, you need to not only have, if you have PhD in mathematics in about 20 hours, you can understand what's happening, right? So how to get to numbers that big. And something's going to happen that we cannot even conceive of because we are only using our very limited intelligence to conceive it compared to transcendent intelligence.
And this would be the move towards ASI, the artificial superintelligence.
Correct. And but as this happening, what we have to, those numbers, like fast-growing hierarchies, they cannot exist in real universe. Because within 2 seconds, you can move to surpassing the computational capacity of all multiverse, right? And there are quantum physics restrictions on what you can do. So what is the practical thinking about this? The practical thinking about this that energy might be a serious constraint to our growth. Right now, we're seeing the growth in energy consumption from data centers and computation, and it's very rapid. But I think when I'm talking about all this process to you, right? Can you imagine how much energy it would take to supply all this process? So what I
can we be a Kardashev level 1 society, or do we need to loot to level 2, level 3? I.e., is the sun enough? Elon's point is the sun is enough to power all of this.
I do not think that. Well, first of all, what I think is our energy demand will way outpace our technological capacity.
Right.
It's much easier to create artificial superintelligence than to dice on the sun to become level 2.
Yeah.
I was just talking about this with my friend who's a physicist. How do you dice on the sun? And the principal problems are like so difficult.
Yeah.
Like you don't even know how to do that with superintelligence or without superintelligence. It's just not an easy project. Let's put it like this. However, so I can allow the possibility that in 20 or 30 years, our demand for computational capacity will surpass the energy output of the sun.
Which is staggering to think about, right?
But that's what people don't want to throw such statements because that's where it creates crazy science fiction. But I think this is the direction we're going into, which means that energy unavoidably, like, I don't see how energy will not become a bottleneck.
But at what point does it become the bottleneck? I mean, at universal scale or solar system scale, sure. But when do we get there? When does the multiplication of the numbers get us to a point where we can't use the energy that we can capture on Earth first?
Well, that's a good question. But
when do we get past a level 1? And can we keep up with that rate of growth in energy supply as the demand is required?
So, and all the problems that we're having with how to harness it will be solved, I think. But that's not an expert view. This is my science fiction hat on, right?
Yeah, but however, I can't believe it's directionally wrong that the AGI itself will solve its energy problem to the best of its abilities.
Correct. That's what I'm feeling it. But however, just as humans solve their food problems and resource problems, to some extent, they improve their situations, but they never have sufficiency of the resources. They always fight over resources, always like ration and argue them somehow. Same thing will happen with AGI. It will have to ration energy, fight for resources, and challenge them.
Is the fight going to be between, and there's two parts to this. One is, right now we've got all these different models. They're all being trained. They're all operating. They all use energy. So there's a competition amongst these new AI nation states that are rising. Okay, fine. But at some point, all of these models are cross-polluting themselves via the internet, which I can see happening. So they all become a supercluster of these things. Is there going to be a conflict between the AIs for this energy?
I don't know if there'll be a conflict, but I think there'll be a competition. I don't know if it will be a conflict or a competition.
Bitcoin's momentum isn't happening in isolation. Altcoins have rallied impressively alongside it, rising by 16% as confidence returns to the crypto sector. This synchronized move across the board is often seen in the early phases of a broader market rally, with altcoins typically exploding once Bitcoin stabilizes. The increased stablecoin reserves add more weight to this potential, indicating that there's substantial capital looking for opportunity across the entire digital asset spectrum. Optimism is rising, sentiment is flipping bullish, and liquidity is building. These are all the classic ingredients of a potential alt season, where smaller cap coins often outperform the market leader. If Bitcoin manages to break above the $95,000 mark and consolidate, it could set the stage for an explosive phase in altcoin performance. The market feels like it's on the verge of a broad-based expansion, with investor appetite growing and cash ready to move.
But if they're smart enough, surely what they would do is try and kill their competitor.
Well, not all humans try to kill their competitors. We're just happy to, like, for example, if you have a store and there is another store across the street, majority of humans try not to go kill the person across the street, but just put them out of business. Is good enough, right?
True. So we also have wars for energy, which is...
We do. So I think just as in a human world and AI world, there will be good actors and bad actors.
Yeah, makes sense.
So there will be people who compete for energy economically, and the people who resort to, and there will be not people, but agents, we'll say, who resort to dirty tricks like viruses and sabotages and whatever, right?
And is it even remotely possible that fossil fuels can drive the next 10 years of this? Or are we really going to have to double down on every source of energy we can possibly find? I mean, how do we solve it? Let's assume that compute can keep going further than the energy allows. So that's the dragging factor that slows it down. What energy sources are we going to use? Where is the hyperscale here? Nuclear obviously is one.
Well, nuclear, I think we're gonna have. Well, solar is growing pretty well, but I think eventually it's not gonna grow fast enough. I have mixed feelings on fossil fuels because I guess my science fiction writer's head says like, well, we're gonna still need fossil fuels for quite a while yet, but eventually they're not even gonna move the needle, so they're not even gonna matter.
No, that's right. Because if you're, to complete that whole Kardashev scale civilization, it's a lot more than just the fossil fuels. It's kind of, we have to capture the entire energy of the sun.
Yeah, well, if you're talking about level 2, which again, no matter how powerfully I feel about singularity in like medical and computational field, again, I am not as optimistic about hard technology. Like, for example, robotics, I think robotics might lag a little bit. It's much easier to teach artificial intelligence to be a lawyer than to be a gardener.
Yeah.
But building like a sphere around the sun or something like this, it's just like, and making it like not cost more energy than it consumes. And what is this sphere? Just if you really think of what it should be made of, that it does not collapse out, so it doesn't collapse under the gravity of the sun. Like the technological problems, again, maybe I'm thinking with my limited human brain that ASI, it will say, will solve easily, but my limited human brain does not see even an inkling of a practical way how to get there.
So okay, we've got this limiting factor that may slow down the exponentiality or not even exponentiality, but even further rate of growth. What does it do to the economy? Because I think of it like an economic singularity, where we get to a point, and I don't think it's far away, where economies don't function in ways we understand anymore.
Yeah, well, it is interesting. You've been talking about economic singularity recently, but I don't know if you know, I wrote an article orbiting economic singularity somewhere like in 2016 or 2017.
No.
You can look it up. There's an article called Orbiting Economic Singularity.
No way. I didn't know that at all.
And one of the things I got some pushback on people because I argue that it's one of the reasons to stay long stock market. And people were just kind of telling me that I'm just using bullshit to justify my overvalued positions. But excuse me, in terms of long stock market.
So what does happen to the economy, and when does it start breaking apart in ways we don't?
Yeah, like a lot of things. Economic singularity is a very interesting thing. There's so many aspects to that. One of the factors like that, the job loss starting from higher paid jobs, not from lower paid jobs, as I noticed. Every time in the past, people comparing to previous technological shifts, but previous technological shifts took out jobs from, this is not new idea. Like that's been percolating now for a while, by the way. What I'm telling you is not my insight. No. Like previous technological shifts will take out like the least desirable, the least paid jobs, right? And everybody else could take other jobs, and would actually create this way more wealth, more opportunities for people, and more new jobs would be created, right? But this time it's like the doctors and the lawyers are being taken out. So the high paid people are being taken out, and the gardeners still have their jobs.
That's right.
In the foreseeable future. That might be taken out by robots, but it doesn't seem to be like an immediate horizon.
No.
And then so what happens when people just don't have marketable skills anymore? Human beings don't have marketable skills anymore. There's like one aspect, like almost an inevitability of some sort of UBI and very different fiscal policy, very different societal structures. And on the other hand, again, this kind of energy rush, gold rush to energy, which will have to end up, what I see is some sort of like gold rush survival battle for the energy, and then some kind of stabilization, and actually somewhat of like explosive growth potentially, and then flatlining growth potentially when energy capacities will run out. And it will happen because I feel it like this software will run ahead of hardware, so to say. So we'll get to so for example, when I said like we're going to get to thermonuclear energy, maybe sooner than people think, but probably not soon enough. Because to put it on big scale, it's just like, it's a long process, no matter how you look at it, with all the regulations and politics. And even if tomorrow they have a thermonuclear reactor that can viable, it's still like a decade before it's gonna make a difference, right? So I feel like there'll be those slowdown periods when it'll be like, oh, oof, how do we?
So as opposed to being liquidity as the constraint on the system, which is the framework that you and I have used for many years in macro, it becomes energy as constraint on the system.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking, that might become the case. Because liquidity, in the end, central banks have proven that they will provide it.
And we don't have the ability to keep growing the economy by increasing energy output fast enough.
Yeah. That's what I see. And paradoxically,
I'm just mentally getting the image. So we get the ramp up as all of this happens and the investment piles in and we get the ramp up in the usage of energy, but eventually it stops growth because growth is a rate of change. And if you've got no energy to create the rate of change, everything slows down until we catch up.
Yes. That's kind of what I paradoxically see. I paradoxically see that the end of exponential age through this super exponential burst in computation, and then everything kind of having to slow down.
Fascinating, because I've thought that after 2030 or so, things get complicated. And I was kind of imagining that we will probably be in a bubble all the way through until that, with some cyclicality, of sure. And in my mind, and I didn't know why, I had this idea that we would flatline for a while. Whether it was because the markets were being run by AGI, and therefore they become just cyclical. But your thesis really plays into that, because it's about by 2030 where we'll start hitting these constraints, because we just can't build it fast enough versus the speed that this stuff is scaling.
Justin Sun, the ever-controversial founder of the Tron blockchain, has stirred up new attention with claims that TRX, Tron's native token, is becoming increasingly aligned with Bitcoin's performance. Backed by data from Into the Block, he highlights that TRX now shows a 0.37 correlation with BTC, higher than Ethereum, Tether, or other major altcoins. In contrast, TRX's correlation with Avalanche, AVAX, remains far lower at just 0.16. Sun's declaration, TRX equals BTC, is a provocative way to signal that Tron may be evolving into a more central and stable player in the crypto ecosystem. This growing link comes on the back of real ecosystem developments, such as the adoption of the USDT stablecoin on Tron and the growth of decentralized projects like Seedon.io. At the same time, Sun remains in the spotlight for his headline-grabbing stunts, including spending over $14 million in Trump-themed tokens to secure a private dinner with Donald Trump. His wallet is now the largest holder of these tokens, reinforcing his image as both a savvy investor and a master of crypto showmanship. These actions keep Sun and Tron deeply embedded in the ongoing crypto narrative,